we had like several different phases of the writing camp where we'd say there'd been myself and Tom or Dan and Tom, and we'd kind of all like just separate ourselves, and then we'd get together and so on. But this was in the we were just writing on our own accords kind of phase, and Ed sent that demo. It just screamed this is an intro song because I feel like it really captured the essence of what we wanted to do, but also it was very clear that it wouldn't be a single just because of how the song paces itself. And I feel that it does just set the tone in a very visceral way, at least musically.
Yeah, and I think in regards to like the title itself, I think we knew obviously in my head anyway, which might be right or wrong, but our albums are essentially our cycles. So our when we go round the sun, essentially, as it in humanity, our cycles are based around are revolving around a sun. And so when when you're in a band, that cycle is elongated somewhat or condensed somewhat into when you release a record and around the albums. And obviously this is our seventh. And it also is an incredibly significant number in a lot of for a lot of reasons, the number seven. And actually in a lot of circles it is that level of rebirth, it is that new journey, it's that new kind of era. And I think it perfectly represented that, especially the catchline, The Children of the Seventh Son, is that it's that all-consuming journey that we're all going on this new cycle. And so, yeah, the minute we kind of heard that, and certainly heard that track, it was like that is the one. And that's the one we want to kind of attribute to it. And certainly that statement of intent for that song specifically, it had to be the first track. It couldn't sit anywhere else. And it's almost like an elongated intro, really, rather than a fully formed kind of song, I suppose. And I'm sure people will listen to it as that and enjoy it as that. But actually, the minute we heard it, we knew it was an intro, really.
I think Abandon Us, like musically, demo-wise, was one of the ones that we were probably all most excited about kind of recording. And obviously all the songs develop in their own way in the studio, but I think that was one that we kind of earmarked from the very beginning as feeling like that could be something special. I think just, the pacing of it, it's one of those songs that you can't really do anything but bob your head to, which is always a good thing. We knew it was going to be good live, and I think as it started to come together in the studio, it really took on a whole new kind of form. Tom's chorus was really exciting to us, and obviously Dan kind of experimented a little bit more vocally on that track as well, and with that kind of that catch line, which has become quite a popular thing with the fans since we released it. So yeah, I think in the demo stages it was exciting. It's one of those tracks that kind of we started off excited about it, and it really it kind of ended up even better than we hoped once we'd finished in the studio, really.
Yeah, I think its place on the album as well demonstrates the sort of dynamic shifts that we've incorporated within the band. It's essentially a metal dance. At least that's how I wrote it musically. It's got peaks and troughs and elongated build-ups and so on. And it's just, it's essentially meant to be an adrenaline-inducing metal song. And at least live, it seems that that's reciprocated somewhat. So, yeah, it's. I feel like it was the perfect track too.
It's probably the biggest interplay between myself and Tom. From a vocal perspective, both of us are in that space where we're almost interchangeable and overlapping with each other, which I think just creates a bit of a wall of sound, really. And I think, potentially in the past, this would have been a song that would have been kind of held up as, oh, that's your radio song, right? That's the commercial song. And I think when you enter into doing things like that, that generally makes things sound probably worse, because you're really like boxing yourself into that is a song that we're going to write in a specific way. And I think with this entire album, we've tried to just not do that at all. We've tried to be like, look, let's just see where it takes us. And we knew that this song obviously started off with a lot of melody, but actually it's still a very heavy song, and the riff itself is melodic. It's a very catchy riff that you can sing along to, but it's also heavy. And I think that's a really important distinction for Begin Again. And it is, it is an anthemic song. It's a really big chorus, something that me and Tom toyed around with quite a little bit, didn't we? And I think it's a bit of a show-off one for you, isn't it? I suppose. I suppose. Yeah, I think it's the interplay of it is definitely like a huge part, and yeah, I think it's like with every other song on the album, it's been a case of we've just put everything into the process of seeing what the right choices are for each song, and it is a very different one. Like in respects to, there's probably that one and another one that we'll talk about recovery later on that's kind of fit into that anthemic kind of vibe. But yeah, I think it's a show for everybody, to be fair.
It's the one. I remember being on my honeymoon, and you sent me the demo, Tom, for the riff that you wrote. I was just like, I can't wait to put that into the demo phase with all of us, because that was. And again, I'm not used to having people come, at least in the past, with guitar, with riffs, like with additional song ideas, and that really just fitted and enhanced what we'd like to do, because obviously we are a metal band, but we have so many influences from the rock, post-hardcore, just anything else within the guitar-based music spectrum that we are inspired by. And I felt that was just a better version of what we tried to do with that in the past. So yeah, props to Tom for coming up with the basis for that song. And it's just beautiful the way it moves. We've never, again, I'm talking back about dynamics. That's such a big thing for us on this record. But we've wanted to write a song like that for years, and yeah, really glad that we got to do that. And it's track 3 because we just felt that that's where you usually put your first banger, don't you? So you don't want to get too deep in and be like, where's the song? Where's the anthem? There it is, track 3.
Yeah, it was
Yeah.
It was a pretty tough one for me, mainly because I got COVID during the studio process, and so I'd actually recorded all of my, and I completely agree with all the other points. I think we need to always make reference to the fact that this is our kind of history. This is our heritage as a band, as is championing metalcore for many years now. And being able to do a song like that again, whilst I think we've nodded to it before, I don't think we've ever successfully done it which is that kind of thrash and faster elements of metalcore, which I think we've touched on in parts, but not as an entire song. And that's probably as to why it was such a difficult process, because it wasn't something that we'd necessarily done before. And I think it's, testament to how we were all feeling in the studio, being able to do that and finish that in the studio. And then, yeah, vocally, obviously I got COVID. And that's the only song that I hadn't recorded. But I also then got septic tonsillitis from the COVID, which was not the most comfortable thing I've ever done vocally. But managed to
sounds great.
Managed to do it. Some of Jacko's favorite vocal work, which is probably telling. But no, it's really cool. And the setup that we had, the studio that we had, I wouldn't have been able to do it in any other environment. I think it was the most comfortable environment I could possibly be in, being quite uncomfortable. But it sounds great. I am really, really happy with those vocals. And again, it's probably a bit of a flag in the sand for me to be able to say, like, yeah, okay, I can still do it. Do it when I've got all of that, So, but yeah, great song. Super fast. Again, it speeds right up, from Begin Again, which takes it right back. If you had Abandon Us and Forced Divide, obviously this is why picking songs in tracks is really important. It's not just thrown together, because if you had them back to back, it would feel like this consistent rhythm rather than this push and pull that you need to have throughout a record. We knew we were going out on the road fairly soon, and much like how we did with Life, we knew that this was a live song more than probably most. It's got the rhythm that most applies to kind of jumping and enjoying yourself at a show, and that was demonstrated with doing it and road testing it with August Burns Red before it came out, and it was probably one of the best reactions we've had. And it was a song that nobody had heard, which is a classic sign of something that is very special. And I think whilst kind of we knew and we had those thoughts, and we knew that it was a very different song for us. We've never really written a song like that before. It's probably the first of its kind, really. But Dan Weller was a big part of, I think, that. I mean, I think the words he said were, "If you don't pick that as a single, I'm never working with you again." Because I think for him, he really understood that this was a different track. And when we're in the worlds of not just siloing ourselves into the metalcore genre so much anymore, and certainly not with this record. With this record, we made a conscious decision not to go, we're going to write the best metalcore song, like album. We're going to write a great metal album. And I think when you do that, you have to open the doors to some more of that kind of classic metal approach, you know, and some of those people that are the best in the game, you know, people like Slipknot and people like Rammstein and people like that, that they write songs that are incredibly catchy without it necessarily being sacrificed with just melody and being catchy around melody. The riff is catchy, the rhythm is catchy, and actually everything around that then just works. So that from my perspective, the chorus is a screamed chorus, which is always a bit original in our kind of music anyway. And it literally fell on the page. Like it was almost that was probably the easiest part I wrote for the whole record.
Honestly, I know that Ras started with the riff and the chorus, wasn't it?
Yeah.
And I honestly can't remember how that intro came about.
I do remember it were definitely, there were many moments in the studio where just inspiration was very spontaneous, but we knew it was, whatever we would execute would be the right decision.
Because it was written in the studio, weren't
Yeah, I just remember you going in and just playing about with it. Because the lyrics you had were very, they set the tone. I think actually the intro, coincidentally, was like the last part that we wrote for it.
And the outro, I think.
Yeah.
We did that in the piano in the main room as well.
Yeah.
Talk about intro, mate.
But that, I just remember you coming up with that vocal idea and being like, wow, we've never had a song start that way. You know,
we did a lot of that in the studio, I think, across the album, where the beat completely left field things, and whether that was because we were having like a synth session late at night and we were like, oh, that melody there, I wonder if we can sing that. And, you know, obviously Dorse came to us with or certainly myself, from a premise perspective of what the song's kind of about, and, you know, dealing with loss and dealing with the grief of losing someone. And I think, you know, and especially over this time, I think it's really important that music takes you to places that maybe aren't comfortable, but equally are also emotively triggering. And I think the minute kind of heard that, and it was through one of Dorse's friends who was going through that whole process, but also something that everybody goes through at some point in life, and really resonated. And whilst I've touched on that in the past, and, you know, songs like Last Light come to mind, like this was like the perfect moment to really build all of that in. And I think probably for the first time in our career, it was like the almost trifecta of the music, the message, and the lyrics all coming together in this perfect journey. Because the song is a journey in its own right. It's not, oh, that's a really good song as part of a longer album journey. That song in itself goes through almost the cycles of grief. And I don't necessarily think, I think Dorse would have written it in that way, but I don't necessarily think any of us realized actually until we got into the studio, you've got this element of understanding and sorrow in the intro. It then heads into this fast-paced anger and upset, and then it moves into this space of kind of almost dealing with grief and understanding it. And obviously the last line I remember vividly, I was doing that in the studio and being like this, and that was one that I absolutely put my size 10s down on to say, this absolutely has to be the way this song ends, because I think for many people that will be their favorite song, undoubtedly.
This song was written by myself and Tom in lockdown out of sheer frustration. We'd naughty boys hanging out in your studio every day, weren't we, mate? Just so tired of the world because obviously we'd been in lockdown for so long, and so we were coming out of COVID, but we were still very much defeated by it. Me and you were just working on music every day. This is even before the Bury Tomorrow conversations. I had a chorus idea, which was the Majesty chorus idea. And Tom instantly, upon me showing him that, I showed him the guitar part. He was like, that's a chorus melody. I was like, all right, I've got some lyrics for it and a melody, whatever. And then you came straight away with a verse, and we just had a verse, chorus. You wrote another verse, and I just thought that the storytelling in your lyrics were just, I think it's fantastic, mate. Like, I genuinely don't, and I know I'm biased because I'm sat here in the same band as you, but I think that really showcases your talent as a lyricist, as well as obviously a great vocalist. And we just wanted to play on that journey almost again. It felt like the perfect place for Majesty to come out of Wrath. But essentially it's a representation, at least I feel, of myself and yours position in life in that period. Heretic to me it's got that it's almost like a punk attitude in regards to at least how I tackled writing the riffs in it. It's a very again, its intention on the album is to come and provide that almost that the relationship with chaos is throughout the record, and it seems to be that obviously after Wrath and Majesty you have this ethereal sort of but very heavy end. It's almost like, okay, where am I at now? Oh no, you're back into darkness, motherfucker. So it's I just feel that it was perfect for Loz. Loz has just got that pissed off, like hardcore rasp. It's just, I can, it's attitude in his voice, and I felt that that would be the perfect choice. And yeah, it's just really exciting. I was with him when he recorded it, and it really just encapsulated the vibe of what we wanted to portray musically.
Yeah, and I think, vocally, like when you do guests, and lots of people do guest vocalists for various different reasons, and some people do it, they're in a bigger band coincidentally. Wash Sleeves are a bigger band than us, so that does help. But you're absolutely right, James. Like we grew up with that band. Dorse actually grew up with them. So and Tom did as well around the north of the country, and I think us and Sleeps have had a long-standing relationship since probably around 2010, maybe 2009, 2010, where we first really started to get to know those guys, and it's amazing, and what an awesome opportunity for us to pull that together. But whenever you're doing kind of guest vocals, for me anyway, I really like it to bring something different. And I think both of the guest features that we've got on this record do that. And I think, I just don't think it would add anything if I put a screamer on the same track as me, who sounds exactly like me. I think that just wouldn't have added or elevated a song. It would have been doing it for doing its sake. Whereas actually, he's a really good friend of ours. He's a really solid dude. Like, he's a good guy. He's got some amazing pissed off vocalists. He's the frontman of one of the biggest bands in the UK. That we've grown up with and we're incredibly proud of, and it just seemed almost like, and he's never done a feature before, so for us we were like, whoa, we've got all of those things as this beautiful kind of storm coming together, and the whole process was amazing. He genuinely was so up for it, did it, was part of the video that originally I think he thought was going to be a performance video, which is a little bit more comfortable for anyone that is in a band, probably would say the same, than doing kind of full narrative and acting. And then he came down and we're all acting, and it's -6 outside, minus probably 10 inside the warehouse that we were.
Awful.
We were all absolutely freezing, and he sat there and he did it all, and he did it with a smile on his face and grace, and absolutely nailed it.
Such a good dude.
And so we're eternally grateful to the guy for doing that. I hold it, in my opinion, as the biggest chorus on the record, and I have done since it was created. Obviously, it's all subjective, and everyone has their own favourites, and you probably get into arguments trying to favour which one it is. But
really,
yeah, never would happen. But I think for me, it's a monster chorus. Again, it's quite classic metalcore. I think it's a different part of metalcore,
like post-hardcore, what we touched
on. And then things like Story of the Year, bands like that have almost been on the lighter end of trade.
Portraits, man, it pays homage to that, I think.
Yeah, I just think it's a really cool moment. Again, from a lyrical perspective, it's back almost in the worlds of Cannibal. But again, we've made reference to chaos and living in chaos and living in that fire and understanding it. And, we live in a chaotic world right now, and we have done for many years, but particularly at the moment, things feel really, really intense and really, really kind of acutely focused in how uncertain everything is on the planet. And I think we all have kind of reflected on that over the last 3 years and have really started to ask ourselves questions. How do we function in times of uncertainty, which is a really, really difficult thing to do. And so from a lyrical perspective, this is almost like a call and response to, or just a call out to kind of Cannibal, to kind of say, like, actually, for me, from a recovery perspective, there is no recovery. Like, and that's okay, you know. And for me, I know I'm going to be living with anxiety and have a relationship with depression and kind of OCD and intrusive thoughts for the rest of my life. And there's almost solace sometimes in being able, that's okay, because that's how you cope, that's how you understand yourself better, is how you accept that that is part of you. And it's not to dwell on that, it's not to kind of have that rumination, but it's definitely to accept that that is just part of it, you know. And there's a really cool moment on it, which I've always wanted to do. And since we hear bands like Funeral for a Friend and bands like Story of the Year and Thrice, all these bands have done these kind of almost voice clips where somebody's speaking, whether it's their vocalist or someone in the band, or whether it's a kind of sample of something else. And I've always wanted to do one in our music, and it's never felt right. And coincidentally, it was at the exact time that I mentioned about Force Divide, where Tom was kind of finalizing some of the melodies in there and getting the chorus done, and I was actually sat in the other part of the studio isolated. So I'd been isolated for 2 weeks, and the studio and Dan had kindly set up, and Ellis, massive shout out to Ellis who engineered the record, great human being. Basically, there was a studio on one side and a living space on the other, with a front room in it. Amazing house in Hothead Studios. And they'd put a wire across, basically, from the studio so I could have a mic and headphones in where I was isolating, so I could hear the record and feel part of the record, so it wasn't just a full isolation. And we were doing recovery, and I sent Dan a voice note of me talking about recovery in general as a topic. And he was like, we can put it in, we should put it in. And I was like, it could go there. And he's like, yeah, absolutely, put it in. And it just sets the whole tone to that song, of it being such an introspective look, but quite relatable. And I'm just super proud of that song. I think it, as you made reference to, James, it'd probably be a really great moment live, you know, to hear that and hear people sing along that chorus. And again, it does those things like stalls. You know, that's a typical post-hardcore or Story of the Year style, you know, or the more melodic element of metalcore is that kind of classic stall break in the chorus for that big crowd moment. And yeah, it's an incredibly intricate song that sounds quite simple, which is always a good way round. It's always better that way round than the other way round.
What did you call the riff, Tom, in that? Technical exercise or something?
Yeah, it's a technical exercise in metalcore riffing.
Because it sounds super simple, but it is actually a bit of a burden to play. So yeah,
you put the melody above ease to play, so it's like the melody sounds so natural. You're like, oh, that must be easy, and then you watch your hands go in, it like turns into 10 fingers. It's mad.
Care was the first song that myself and Tom ripped together. Again, in lockdown, we were just like, should we write a metal song? Never wrote a metal song together, mate. Let's do it. So we wrote that, but it was very different. So it was a little slower, and we wrote it in like droppy on your 8 string.
Yeah.
But the fundamentals were there. And then once...
And no vocals, but it...
Well, essentially, no. We'd kind of assigned ourselves to the fact that the band wasn't a thing anymore. So I was like... well, we have an old song, you know what I mean? I was just like, oh, maybe me and Tom can start a new band. And then obviously in the midst of thinking Bury Tomorrow was done, I was like, well, we'll probably do something at some point. So, you know, showed Dan, and he'd started playing about with some ideas. Just, again, we were still in lockdown. It's just something to pass the time. And then we were like, oh, actually, no, like, you know, we can do something here. Oh, no, we'd just come out of lockdown, I guess.
Yeah, we were, yeah. Yeah, it's amazing. Like, genuinely, I remember being blown away. Like, what the hell are you holding out on me? Like, genuinely, I was quite offended that that they'd have this song and not have shown us before.
It's like Force Divide. It's like that riff, we're going to give it away, and then we care. They just had a song, and like I remember they sent the demo through, and we were like, Where the hell has this come from? Like, I'm baffled.
When you hear it on the record and you think back to how Life and Death sounds, you can feel like Care plugs the gap that those two tracks didn't do, which is this angry, almost deathcore, I would say, very, very brutal element of music. But then you lean into that chorus, and I remember hearing Tom write the pre-chorus, and I absolutely lost my mind to it, because I was like, so I'd written the chorus, and I was like, yeah, that sounds cool. Tom wrote the pre-chorus, so I was like, oh my god, this is going to be a big moment. But the blend between me and you and the chorus is probably the best, I would say, the best moment for us and how it's not just standard, because usually in metalcore it goes person does the verse, person does the chorus. We might, if we want to mix it up, both go together, but actually that song goes just in and out and in and out, doesn't it?
Yeah, it works really well, and it was because it was in E. It were originally, it were kind of like a higher range distorted vocal from me along with yours, and then when we brought it to studio, well, I think we agreed on G sharp, and then obviously that was way too high, so then having the kind of calmer, like lower clean vocals with you as well, it just added some magic to it.
I mean, it's another, what's really interesting is Ed came with both the Seventh Son and Carcass King. So whether that means that Ed is a fantastic kind of bookend writer when it comes to this stuff. I mean, he came with both of those, kind of the riff really and the kind of melody. And what Ed's really, really good at is discordant melody. He's really into bands like Deftones and understands that actually to be heavy, you don't have to be just riffy. And I think we all get that, but he adds in certain chords and the way he writes is very, very clear in the Seventh Son and Carcass King. And again, in couplets, they do link together and they do feel quite similar, because it's almost that irregularity of the chords that he uses, which creates this weird dark feeling about about the song. And Cody, I mean, I don't talk about adding elements into your band. I mean, that elevated that song.
We've wanted to do that for so long.
It was unreal. And I remember Dan obviously works with Cody, works on kind of songwriting and producing with her, and what an unbelievable artist. Like, at the minute we were kind of showing Cody's work in life, when we were kind of doing Death and Live, I remember going away we were like playing shows and we were just constantly listening to Cody's music, and it was like, this is insane. And so when we then headed into the studio, we could be like, Dan kind of said, we were like, we want to do guests. We want one melodic guest and kind of one heavy guest, Loz being the heavy one. And then we were like, well, surely this is the right person. And I remember it was after, and the miracle of technology that we live in now, which we're very lucky to be able to do, but we'd finished the studio time for us. Dan was in session with Cody, and did audio movers, which for anybody that doesn't know what that is, it means that you can basically listen to the live mix of somebody recording through kind of, Zoom and stuff like that. And we were listening to Cody track, all of us, we were all messaging, and we were all like writing in WhatsApp, like, what the hell? And then she was like, oh, it was that good? And we were all just like, oh my God. And so every like second, so she'd do it in the vocal booth and then come and see Dan, and then he'd have like 25 messages of us all saying the same stuff.
I remember being in Tesco and I had goosebumps, and she was doing the ending. I was like, fucking hell. Like, I'm just there buying a bit of almond milk, and Christ alive.
But it is the perfect closer. I don't think the album would be anywhere near as complete if you didn't have that kind of coming full circle at the end and closing that off. I love that it ends with Tom singing. I think that's a really important statement for us to make. And it's, we've made reference to tracks similar, and from other artists, bands, ourselves, but also bands like Slipknot doing things like Vermilion, and again making reference to us not being hemmed into just a metalcore band. And there's nothing wrong with being a metalcore band. We will fly that flag probably until the end of this band's career, but with this record specifically, we really wanted to focus in on being the best band we could be, and this is a moment that we would never ever have done before this time and this era. And I think it shows, because again, we're 12 hours into it, maybe 12 hours into releasing the record, and already people are like, that's the one, and I think that's a statement really. And I think we all need to reflect on that, and we will do that over this time and think about what's worked or what maybe we'd like to change from the album. But actually this will be a moment that we'll go, just trust yourself, boys, like just trust yourself and just enjoy it. And that is an absolute enjoyment moment of us going, wow. And I do remember listening to it, and for the first time in doing this for 16 years that we have, that's the first time I've managed to listen to our band almost as a new band. And I was kind of like, how is this happening? How can I sit in the studio and go, this feels like a new band? Like, this is unreal. And that's great. And it creates that excitement and that buzz and that enjoyment that it should be to be in a band.